Hey there, and welcome to the KidzMatter podcast, your go-to resource for all things children's ministry. Each week, we bring you fresh ideas, inspiring stories, and practical insights to help you lead, love, and serve kids like never before. Whether you're just getting started or you're a seasoned pro, we're glad you're here. Let's get started. Well, hey there, and welcome back to the KidzMatter podcast. My name is Peckett, Augustine, and I'm thrilled that you've decided to join us for another episode. Today, we're going to be interviewing Yancy, who many of you already know and love because of her incredible role in the KidMin worship world. We think she's awesome, and we love having her at our KidzMatter conference. You'll see her again there this year leading some breakouts. But today, we're going to talk with her about her new podcast, Stained Glass Kids, which is designed for pastors' kids and ministry leaders' kids of any age. We're excited for today's conversation, and you're not going to want to miss it. So stay tuned as we check on a message from today's sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by the KidzMatter Conference, taking place October 7th, 8th, and 9th at Evansville, Indiana. This is a conference you won't want to miss. With 6 incredible main sessions, over 200 breakouts, and over 180 ministry partners present, this is a conference that's going to add value to your life and to your ministry. We hope to see you there. You can register today at thekidsmatterconference.com. We can't wait to jump into today's conversation, so let's get started. Well, hey, KidzMatter podcast family, welcome back for another episode. We are so excited. I say that every time because I just love all the people we get to talk to, but I am really excited about this one. We are talking with Yancy, and you may know Yancy from her music. You may know her from her podcast, Stained Glass Kids. We're going to talk about all of it, but we're going to get started by just hearing a little bit about who you are, Yancy. So why don't you share? You're a fan of KidMin. You're a KidMin legend for a lot of us who have been in kids ministry. We've used your music for our kids or teens, but how did you get started in kid ministry and music? Tell us about you.
Yeah. So, I'm a church kid through and through. So my dad has done and been a part of children's ministry and family ministry my whole life. So grew up around KidMin for sure, going to conferences with him, just spending a lot of time in that world. And I had always really kind of known since I was like single digits, like I felt like music was something God had put me on this earth to do. Started off on kind of more of a normal CCM Christian music path with that, and did that and led worship for a lot of different ages, adults, students included, as well as preteens and kids. And, I kind of like to think of it as God doesn't always tell us all the details, like before we're ready. And I think honestly, I now laugh about it because it's like the number one song in my catalog every single year, Hosanna Rock, a song I wrote for preschoolers. And just speaking honestly, I don't think my 16-year-old self, was ready to hear with the dreams and the aspirations I had of what my music could do one day. I don't think my 16-year-old self was ready to hear that one day my number one song ever would be a song I wrote for preschoolers. And so fast forward a lot of years, I just had the opportunity to write some music for a kids camp and sing on a record for some friends of mine that were making kids music, and just some easy opportunities to say yes to because they were all just individually good, but they weren't long-term commitments. And so, over the span of a few years, that just kind of snowballed a little bit. And then I also started having more friends in ministry and churches that I know call and ask me to do an event for preteens, for instance, before I even said that. And so I just got into a certain fork in the road, and it just became obvious that God was like shining a light over here.
Yeah.
For me to do kids and families. And so by the start of 2008, I was officially like all in, knowing like, okay, kids and families, that's my thing. And, because I had so much history with KidMin, it wasn't like a shock to the system or some huge education process. It was just kind of like, oh, okay, I know that world. I know how to do that. So let's just mix the two things together and move forward making kids music.
I love that. I love how the Lord gives us those breadcrumbs, right? That it's like, okay, we're taking these steps. And I know I never wanted to do KidMin. I always thought it'd be youth, because KidMin wasn't cool, It
Yeah.
wasn't the thing. Like I was called to ministry and I wanted to be a youth pastor or a missionary. And then the Lord just kind of kept, those breadcrumbs and you just find yourself in this new position. And I feel like that's how a lot of us probably were with KidMin, that like you said, it was just these baby steps that we got to. And then the Lord was like, this is where I want you. And this is
Right.
place where I've called you. So I love that you walked in that obedience. And he's so
Yeah.
kind, like you said, to shine a light and to prepare us for that. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
awesome that he led
And
you.
two, it was one of those things like it felt like at that point in the journey, like in so many ways, my life made sense because it was like all these different pieces and elements. It's like they got put in a blender,
Yep.
finally. And it was like, oh, those things actually work together really well. But it was certainly all God's idea. It was not mine or my dad's either.
I love that. That's awesome that he's kind of led you where you are now. And I would love to hear from you as someone who obviously is in the worship world. What do
Mhm.
you think is so important and critical about KidMin worship? Because there's a
Yeah.
lot, like you said, you started with more the adult world. There's a lot of focus on the adult world of worship, but I love that you're in that niche of KidMin. What is so critical about that KidMin worship?
Well, I mean, there is so much that could be said about it. And I wrote a book about it. So
Yes.
if you haven't read Sweet Sound, The Power of Discipling Kids in Worship, definitely check that out because it will certainly give you a bunch more scriptures and just thoughts behind the power of kids worship. But I think, something that I would encourage people, listening today to think about is just the power of music and the words that you're singing. You're writing messages on your heart, your
Yeah.
spirit, man, your life. And so, as much as we want Sunday to be really awesome, our Wednesday night to be really awesome, and we should program for that. It's about writing these messages and these truths and giving them the articulation. One way I say it is like putting praise on their lips. And so,
Right.
one worship leader I was coaching earlier this year, I loved this perspective as she got ready to plan her songs for that month. She just really thought, like, what are the truths that I want to be
Mhm.
on these kids' lives, And so she picked some of her songs specifically because of what those songs said. And the cool part was, fast forward a couple of weeks, they'd had a major tragedy at their church. And it was so easy to see how that song in particular that she had chosen for that month was exactly the right thing. And it's like the spirit knew that, and guided her in that planning process. And it was something that she could help those kids sing truth, know it, get it written,
Mhm.
embossed, etched, all the things deep down in their spirit, man. And I think that's the thing that encourages me is like, I want kids to have a great time and I want them to connect and experience the presence of God
Right.
in that particular service and setting. But I know that what I am doing is marking them and helping grow their relationship. And so for me, it's always much more of a long game of I want to do what I'm doing now, knowing it's going to help them 10 years from now,
Right.
30 years from now, and these other seasons of life, because music is sticky. It's an amazing tool we have. And those songs will come back up in a quiet place, in a chaotic part of life, in a stressful season, in a medical diagnosis, like whatever thing. And so that's one of the things I think is so powerful about what we get to do with kids worship.
I completely agree. There are still songs from when I was a kid that, maybe now I look back and I'm like, oh, it was a little silly or it was a little corny, some of the lyrics, but they were so powerful, right? That it has
Yeah,
stuck with me that as a fifth grader, I thought, well, I don't know. But now I'm like, those lyrics are still there and they're still
yeah,
echoing in my heart more than even some of the worship songs I know today because
yeah,
they're just that young mind is so impressionable and just it's stuck there. And so that's really
yeah,
cool. I love that.
yeah,
That
for
is
sure.
awesome. Well, I completely agree. I love Psalm 8. I'm sure that's in your sweet sound.
Oh,
So
it
that's
is.
a
Psalm
must
8,
read.
1 and 2, message translation. God, brilliant Lord, yours is a household name. Nursing infants gurgle courses about you, and toddlers shout the songs that drown out enemy talk and silence atheist babble. And reading that verse and that translation was certainly the beginning of like my mind grasping
Mm.
um, just how powerful kids worship is.
It's critical. And I love what you're
Yeah.
doing. I love, so if you haven't read Sweet Sound, get out there and check it out,
Yeah.
because it is one you're not going to want to miss. And I think worship can become, for us, just one more element of our programming. It can be so easy to be like, okay, well, what song are we going to do today? And I love what you shared. Like, be prayerful, be intentional. What
Yeah.
song are you going to do, not just for this weekend, but how are you creating a theme of educating your kids through song? So that is a great
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
Switching gears a little bit, because we know you from the worship realm, but you just launched, I believe it was 2025, back in January, right? That you launched Stained Glass Kids, or was it a little earlier than that?
It was end of last year.
Okay.
So kind of announced it October of 24, and the interviews started early November. So
That's exciting. Tell us a little bit about your heart behind it. Some of our listeners may have listened to your podcast, but give us like the summary.
yeah.
What's your heart behind Stained Glass Kids? What is it? Tell us about it.
Yeah. Well, oftentimes we've heard that phrase of like break my heart for what breaks yours. Maybe that's a prayer that you have prayed before about something in your life. And I spent a handful of years definitely knowing that God was highlighting to me pastors' kids, PKs, is a
Yep.
term that commonly gets used. I don't use that term exclusively for senior pastors. I think, every children's ministry director, if you're the one that is running that program, you count.
Yeah.
You are in that role of a ministry shepherd, of a pastor. And so your kids are PKs, whether you realize it or not. And so I knew that God was highlighting to me that people group. And I just, honestly was kind of like, okay, God, like, what do you want me to do with that? Like, sure, I can pray about it. I might occasionally have done a social media post about it, but just kind of wasn't really sure what that looked like. And was at a conference and was on a panel that was people were talking about family ministry dynamics and balance and stuff. And I'd been on that panel, and I remember like walking back to my booth after and just thought, there should be a podcast where we talk about things that we don't normally talk about. Because, growing up and knowing the world of church, as a staff kid, as someone that has worked on staff at a church, I know that sometimes there are conversations we have about things that we're walking through, issues that are happening. It might be, political things of just the leadership of the church, stress, drama, hard things, things that aren't fair, things that don't even seem just, like whatnot. It's like sometimes you have that one-on-one conversation with another person, but it's not the things that normally get talked about
Mhm.
from a microphone in general sessions at conferences. I know many times I wasn't ever seeing that blog post, come across my social media feed that would help me know, like, how do I deal with this? What does my heart look like in this? And so, at first I kind of blew off that idea and was just like, I'm busy. I'm doing my kids' music thing. Like, that's a great idea for somebody else, not for me. And fast forward a handful of months, and I had a meeting that honestly I thought would be about a kids' music thing. And just somewhere in there, I mentioned this idea that I had had. My dad was with me, and he brought up, he was like, well, you've had a heart for pastors' kids. And it was like when I sandwiched those two ideas together of, okay, let's talk about some of the issues in church staff life and culture that nobody talks about, and mix that with pastors' kids, and realizing it's not me having all the answers, it's me facilitating conversations to hear from these people who have had a front row seat of growing up in ministry, and just talk about, the good, the bad, the ugly, the things sometimes that they wish a senior pastor or executive pastor knew about their parents' job, just, sometimes it's harder things. But what I am learning is like these pastors' kids are so wise in so
Mhm.
many ways, in so many cases. And I want pastors' kids to feel seen. I think that's one of the biggest things, is I want them to be able to see themselves in someone else's story,
Yeah.
and maybe even realize like, oh, their story's actually like 10 times worse than mine. So maybe I should relax a little bit.
Give us perspective. Yeah.
Just like, but just to have that kind of camaraderie, I want that to be true for the PKs listening, but I also feel like for any and every pastor and church leader that currently is involved in ministry, I'm handing over in these conversations case studies
Hmm.
on a silver platter that we can hear from and learn from. And it's a lot of different perspectives. I've interviewed a senior in high school. So far, I've interviewed a 62, 63-year-old man who grew up a senior pastor's kid. So it's a lot of different ages and perspectives, a lot of different stories, but it is certainly an amazing ministry tool as well to just learn from, to be more, intentional in how we interact with our coworkers' kids, if you work at a church, and to think about maybe some specific conversations and whatnot that you need to have with your own kids that are living at your house. So my hope and my prayer is that it helps heal and restore relationships, that it builds the church. Like there's a lot of clickbait and slanderous things out there, and that's not the point of this. Like I truly believe that the church is a precious
Hmm.
thing. I love it with all my heart. But we know even when you kind of remodel like a historic property,
Mm.
sometimes there's still some cleaning up that needs to happen. Some
Yeah.
walls might have to be moved around and shifted and adjusted. It doesn't mean that it's any less beautiful and any less of a treasure. It just means we need to do a few things to help it stay that way and remain that way for a long time. And so that's my heart in these conversations, is just to help those listening feel seen and maybe have their eyes open to places that they need to just surrender, and allow God to come in and heal, but also just to learn from and grow from.
I love that. It makes me think if you've ever been through any, sort of counseling, those of you listening, that sometimes a counselor will do an exercise where they say, "Hey, tell me you're hurt," and then the counselor will apologize for that hurt. And obviously the counselor wasn't the one who inflicted the hurt, but to hear someone say,
Yeah.
"I'm sorry that you went through that," and to hear like that you're providing that place of, like you can't interview everyone, but the people you're interviewing, like you said, are case studies of people who have
Yeah.
walked through. And I'm sure your listeners are going, "Oh my goodness, that sounds like me," And I did experience that. And to hear that being just aired and even addressed, because I think
Yeah.
sometimes we may not even be able to put our finger on what it was that hurt so badly. And then when we're
Yeah.
hearing someone else talk about it, I love that you're creating that space to say, "Hey, let's air it out." Like you said in your intro podcast, it's not church bashing, it's not deconstruction, it's not any of that, but it's saying, "Hey, we're recognizing that the church is a flawed institution because it's made of people." So the capital
Yeah.
C church is not flawed, right? Christ's body is not, but the members of the body are not perfect. So
Right.
there are
Right.
these injuries that can take place, and I love that you're making space for it.
Yeah.
What is some of the encouragement you share for those of our listeners who are coming from a PK background? And I think a lot of people are, like you, where their story is, "I grew up a PK, I grew up the son or daughter of a children's pastor, and that's what stirred the fire of ministry in me." What are some of the biggest things that you hear that you could speak just encouragement or healing to? Maybe some of the top one or two things that you hear in your podcast that you would speak to
Yeah.
them about.
Well, something that I say in the outro of every single podcast episode is just a truth that I learned in one of those hard, difficult seasons. It was a season of transition. There was just so much tied to it and layered to it. And in that, I realized God is always good, even when his people aren't. Never confuse the two. And like you have to get to a place in life that you can know that. And I think that's just where a lot of people get hung up, is when people make wrong choices and make some decisions that maybe they weren't the right decision. Like some people can get so hung up on just attaching God
Mm,
and that person together, and you've got to learn to separate the two and just realize that God is faithful, God is true, he's all those things, and that never changes, even when some people that are trying their best to serve him, majority of the time might have good intentions and even live righteously, like still are going to make mistakes and hurt. And you have to just learn to separate those two things. I think, um, man, I think if you're raising PKs, I think it's really important to just have some intentional conversations. I think that's one of the things that sticks out in these conversations. In some cases, it's like there were never conversations. A lot of things just got swept under the rug and never addressed. Birth order is fascinating. And there's been so many times that I've heard, especially from firstborns, how no one ever said anything to them, no one ever asked them, but they really take on the burden
Yeah.
of some challenging situations that they know their family is walking through or that their parents are walking through. And so I think, after I heard that several times, it's like, well, that's so insightful. If
Yeah.
I have children and I know, okay, this is a challenging time, I know I need to go check on that oldest child.
Mhm.
I need to have conversations with them and just help them not carry the burden of that situation and really invite them into a space to try to, release that. So it's just some things like that where it just is insightful to help you be a better parent, be a better minister. I think another thing that's been fascinating is just how many missed discipleship opportunities
Mhm.
um, have happened because, especially, towards teenage years, like the same intentional small group questions don't necessarily always get asked of that person who's
Mhm.
parent is on payroll, or because they have a certain last name. A lot is just kind of assumed that they're okay and they have it.
True.
And so I think that's been an interesting thing to hear where it's like, okay, no, actually, if anything, ask them an extra question.
Right.
Create some safe spaces where you are getting up in there and giving them the opportunity to voice some things that they're feeling or to call out them to some things. And I think sometimes it's just almost that comfortability. You're so close, you're so familiar, you know you're doing life like side by side with these people that sometimes, maybe even without us realizing it, we're actually skipping over sometimes the intentional discipleship of our job with some of those people that happen to have a parent that's on staff. And so I think being more intentional in that area is something I'm learning.
That's huge. I love what you said too, because I think a lot of our listeners have kids, but a lot of them may not yet. And even just being intentional with our coworkers' kids, and saying,
Mhm.
hey, can I be the adult that's going to be that safe place in their
Yeah.
life,
Yeah.
that knows their mom, but isn't their mom, isn't
Yeah.
their dad, and can say, hey, I
Yeah.
understand some of what you're walking through because you're in it too. And being able to go, let me make that safe space for these kids because
Right.
sometimes the volunteer, I think of even as a pastor, right? We know as pastors and as adults that we can't share certain things with certain people, right? That there has to be, we want to honor our leadership. We want to honor, the people in
Yeah.
the congregation. And I think our pastors' kids are probably feeling that, like that, like, man, well, who can I even talk to about this? And so saying, hey, let me be a safe space for those kids to be able to share something because, they may not want to share in a small group, hey, my parents are fighting, like,
That's
because my
right.
parents are the
I
pastors.
know they
So
can't do that. Yeah.
exactly. I can't say that in a small group. So making that safe space, I think, is
Yeah.
huge. Um, I just love that. And I think, like you said, for our parents, making those spaces for intentional conversations. Like, I love that insight with the firstborn. And I'm sure you're going to keep
Yeah.
finding so many more of those little nuggets that it's like, man,
Yeah.
maybe you didn't grow up as a
Sure.
pastor's kid, but check out this podcast because if you're raising pastor's kids, you want to learn from, experience is the best teacher when it's somebody else's
Yeah.
experience. So
Yeah.
learn from those who have gone before you, which is huge.
For sure. And I know, like one lady I know that listens regularly that is in ministry, there's been many times she's made a comment to me on social media and she's just like, it's opening to my eyes to conversations we need to have as a staff
Mm.
of deciding how we want to handle certain things, or, even some of those transitions where, okay, there was a staff member and there was sin in their life, various different things. Like there's just even things as a church organization that maybe haven't been on our radar, but we need to talk through it and start kind of wrapping our mind around how we want to care for that person and for that family, when they're going through some of those things. So I think it certainly just presents a lot of things that it's
Yeah.
real easy to stay hidden. And, like I said, it's issues that people don't normally talk about, like I think that there should be breakouts at every single church ministry conference of any type that happen about this subject because it applies to majority of the people that are there that
Right.
do have families and that are raising them in ministry. And so I think it's so many topics that we just don't address. And, I'm trying to shine the headlights on it and say, hey, let's figure this out so that we can build healthier churches, healthier church systems, and ultimately have more people in ministry that are living healthy lives. And, that trickles down to everyone that lives at their house, So they're all true things.
We talk a lot today about breaking generational curses, right? And just saying, hey, my husband and I talk about it a lot, like, hey, we're not gonna pass that down to our future kids. And I think this is huge because you're saying sometimes we don't even know what we need to break. And you're, like you said, shedding light on saying, hey, we don't want this cycle to continue. We don't want
Yeah.
the cycle of hurt or dysfunction, or I even think of just some of the basic things of how busy ministers are and how maybe they're not home as often and some of those things, and saying how can we as a staff, as church members, how can we guard our families, how can we help others guard their families, for those who are listening, maybe a senior pastor or someone who has staff underneath them, how can we protect their time, and even our volunteers. We have
Yeah.
volunteers that are so heavily involved that they're essentially bivocational, that they
Right.
are a part of the staff because of all that they carry. And how can we
Yeah.
look at their kids the same way? We want all the kids to be in our church. We want them to feel
Right.
comfortable. Instead of being annoyed that they're running down the hall, let's be grateful that they're comfortable in the church. And then let's
Yeah.
see how can we help them grow
Yeah.
in a healthy way and be able to develop and grow. I just love what you're doing. And I'm curious, do you have like a community on Facebook, or is there a podcast community that people can join, or is it more right now?
I don't have that yet. It's a frightening thing to think about.
It is.
Getting all of that, and I'm already like doing. It's like a whole nother job that I'm doing on top of
Yes.
everything else. And so far, I don't make any money from it whatsoever. I spend
Right.
money
This is
on
a ministry.
it's
Yeah.
like, okay, God, here I am. Like, here's my loaves and my fishes. Do with it what
Yes.
you want. But I don't have a group or anything, but certainly you can follow on both Facebook and Instagram, Stained Glass Kids. And there's a new episode every single week. So a new interview, a new conversation with someone different. And we normally highlight about 5 things that they said throughout the week and have some graphics that post about that. So you can follow along and share some of those things and share it with your coworkers and other people that you're doing ministry with as well. And I just hope it kind of opens the door for you guys as leaders to have conversations that you need to have to care for the families
Yeah.
that are helping you do ministry, better. And so, yeah, would love for you guys to follow along and share this with other people can benefit.
And I would say you do have a community, Facebook and Instagram. Like, get in there, guys. Jump in the comments. Like, meet people in the comments. Like, share those
Sure.
posts, share and interact. Because I think when we can help people find other people who've been through the same thing and find other people who are walking through it, like, that's a very healing thing. So I just love what you're doing. We're so excited to be partnered with you. You are going to be at our conference, yes? So we're
Yes, I will be
looking forward
there.
to having you there. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing at conference.
Oh, good question. What else?
And what are you not doing?
I know. I'm definitely teaching several breakouts. I have no idea off the top of my mind But they are.
Anyway, great. You're probably doing it for your floor.
They're about kids worship stuff. So that's happening. And then I'll be there in the resource center as well, having a booth and just connecting people to all the different resources that I have to help people make Jesus loud with their lives.
I love it. So find Yancy at conference. If you're not registered, we're talking about it every episode. We are having conference October 7th, 8th, and 9th in Evansville, Indiana. You can register at thekidsmatterconference.com, but sign up for one of Yancy's breakouts. Grab her afterwards. Talk to her about how much you love Stained Glass Kids. Get in on the podcast before then, and then go see her at her booth. Meet her and get, you've gotten to hear her heart today, but our desire is that you would be able to take what you've learned and apply it to the kids and families in your life, right? To the volunteers' kids, to your kids, to many of us come from ministry families, right? So our nieces, our nephews, our cousins, they're growing up as church kids. So take this, share it with somebody, and use it as an encouragement. And Yancy, we're just grateful for our partnership with you. I'm proud. I've known of Yancy. I know we're just meeting today, but I've known of you for a long time. And I love how you're just expanding your ministry and saying yes to the Lord and being obedient to where he's putting things on your heart. And I think this is a huge need that our community needs. So I'm grateful. Thank you for taking the time to interview today.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, all our listeners, we love you. We're grateful for you. Don't forget to sign up for conference, and we will see you next time. I love Yancy's heart for pastor and ministry kids. Let's be honest, it's not always easy to grow up in the church, but we believe that God wants to use these kids, your kids, in incredible ways. So check out Stained Glass Kids by Yancy so that you can learn more about how to impact and invest the pastors and ministry and volunteer leaders' kids who are in your church. We love you. Don't forget you can register for the KidzMatter conference on October 7th, 8th, and 9th in Evansville, Indiana at thekidsmatterconference.com. You're not going to want to miss this amazing experience. We want to see you there. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.